I was in the 9th grade of Dundalk High School, just outside of Baltimore, out in the county, and I wasn't doing well. I had flunked 2 years in elementary school, one in junior high school, and I was part of a bunch of other boys who were having the same problem. I think we all had some kind of attention deficit disorder or something or another like that. Of course, nobody knew what that was back then. There wasn't any such animal. Anyway, Bethlehem Steel, about 10 miles away from us, wanted to do some experiments, I guess. They talked the school into letting us go with them, and they hired all of us boys, I was 15, into the steel mill. I worked 7 hours a day, went to school 1 hour on their time, and 1 hour that later on my own time. At the same time, I was taking 3 hours a day, 2 nights a week, machine shop theory. All of us boys who were having so much trouble making our way through school turned out to be excellent students. We were doing something we wanted to do, and we were doing something we were interested in. And we all did well. I was an honor student in those classes there. The school wasn't accredited, but none of us were going to college anyway, so it didn't matter. I was getting all my math in my machinist training. It started off with a little bit higher arithmetic, and then we went from there to algebra and a little bit of trigonometry, a lot of trigonometry, and solid geometry, and on. Classes in the structure of iron, how the particles of iron, how they work when you heat treat them, and how they become austenite and so on and so forth, particles, and it was a good all-around education in a lot of ways, because we also had some middle management classes where we learned some of that. The Bethlehem Steel was clearly thinking that we might be better than average employees. Well, my first month was spent in the open hearth. Oh man, what an eye-opener that was. There was fire flying all over the place, and molten metal pouring, and huge cranes bringing giant ladles with tons and tons of molten iron in them. They were loading coal and limestone and iron ore and God knows what, all kinds of metals and all kinds of things. Then they would fire up the furnaces, and they were constantly taking samples. I had to run samples up to the lab to have them tested, and they would add a little of this, a little of that to bring out the iron at the right consistency, and to be able to make the right kinds of steels out of it that they needed to make. Then they sent me over to the coke ovens, and I worked there for about a month. They put coal in the ovens up in the top of it, and they heated the coal with a fire underneath in a burner, and as the coal was heated, gas cooked out of it. And the gas was piped down to the furnace, and it was burned to keep on heating the coal to make coke. And of course, coke was needed to make iron and steel because it burned hot and it burned clean. And so it was the product of the coke ovens, but it was used in the making of steel. And they sent me over to the 56 inch hot strip where we were rolling steel plate, and then finally to the tandem mills where we were rolling cold roll steel for automobile skins and body parts and tin cans and really light metal products, some of it. And we sent it, and then I worked a little bit in the washers where they sent the steel to be washed, had the oil that was put on it for rolling washed off. Well, it was here in the 42-inch washers that I almost lost my job. If I hadn't been so young, they'd have fired me. The purpose of washing the steel was to get the oil off of the steel that they had used in rolling the steel. And so that when they put it into the annealing ovens, it wouldn't all stick together. Because that oil turned into almost like glue when you heated the steel up red hot. And I had been out playing all day at the beach with the girls, like 16-year-old boys are apt to do. And I hadn't had any sleep. And I was tired and I was sleepy. I was working 11 to 7 that night. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I just couldn't hold my eyes open anymore. I leaned up against the electrical box there and went to sleep. And they got to wondering where I was. And they come hunting for me, found me, woke me up. Well, I was working as tank tester, and it was my job to keep the proper amount of soap and caustic soda in the water all the time to dissolve the oil. So all of that steel went through with oil on the metal, and it all stuck together in huge globs of steel. The coils of steel ran between 12 and 15,000 pounds each, and there was 46 coils of steel all stuck together, and the guys in the washers had to rerun all that stuff. Took a couple days to rerun it because it was really slow going. It was stuck together. They had to pull it apart a little bit as they went, and they couldn't run fast, had to run slow. And they got paid tonnage in addition to their hourly rate. It cost every man in there a little over $300 in tonnage to have to rerun that steel, plus they lost the tonnage for the first running of it. Well, they'd have fired me. If it had been any other circumstances, I'd have been gone. And God knows how my life would have been different. But anyway, I got lucky that night. That's all there was to it. Then maybe it was plated with probably nickel plating, maybe galvanized, depending on what the purpose of the steel was. And I worked in all those departments, about a month each one. And I became very knowledgeable about how to make steel. And at the same time, they sent me over afterwards. After that, they sent me over to one of the machine shops. The shop I entered into was the oldest shop in the mills. It was built about a little later than 1900. Machinery was really old, antiquated. Most of what we made was parts for gears and shafts and bearings and stuff for the smaller machines in the steel mills, and the smaller parts for even bigger machines. But we made all of that stuff. Most of it you didn't make they didn't give you a tolerance. They didn't say, turn this shaft to 3 inches plus or minus 1/1000. They would tell you, you're going to make this shaft and that bearing, and the fit of the bearing to the shaft will be a light running fit. Well, you looked up in your machinist manual to see what a light running fit was for a 3-inch shaft or a 6-inch shaft, whatever size shaft it was, and whatever kind of bearing it was. If it was a bronze bearing, it was one clearance, and if it was a Babbitt bearing, it was another. And so you made the shaft and the bearing so that the two would run freely together and not wear, and be able to have enough clearance in there to keep oil or grease in there. All those parts were made for old machines in the time before they built machinery with interchangeable parts. You made a part and you made the other part to fit it. So no two machines were alike. And they couldn't just order up a box of parts and take them out in the shop and put them in a machine and have it work. It all had to be fitted, machined and fitted for the application that the machine was to perform. Anyway, They saw something in us boys. I think we were all a little bit, and also some training so that we would have some place to go when we got older and didn't want to do or wasn't able to do some of the heavier work, but had the ability to run a plant, a mill, a machine shop, or some other part of the steel mills. I had tremendous pride in what I did. I loved it. I loved my work like nothing you could believe, like my wife. My father was a machinist, and he encouraged me to leave the steel mills and go to work in job shops around Baltimore, where you made one and two of this and that or the other, where you did a little repair work maybe, and all kinds of things, just every kind of machining thing that you can think of was done in those job shops. I didn't like big companies to start with. They wanted to tell you how to do things. I wasn't interested in somebody telling me how to do my machine work. He told me, he said, Doug, work in a shop until they ask you to do the same job over again for the second or maybe third time. And then start looking for another job. Leave in good, give good notice so that you can always get a recommendation from them. And learn all kinds of different things. Learn how to do it. Learn to be a high production machinist. Learn how to do one-off a research and development machinist. Learn all of that stuff, and you will always be in demand, and you will never be bored for a moment. Work for engineers. Learn how to be. It paid off for me because Bethlehem Steel was having big problems. They were dumping slag, the product of making cast iron, into the Chesapeake Bay and building land for places to build new mills. Well, the Maryland government decided they didn't need Bethlehem Steel anymore, that the economy was good enough that they didn't have to have them, so they stopped them from dumping slag in the water, which was maybe a good thing. But the problem was there was no place else to dump it. And over time, they shut down that steel mill, put 45,000 blue-collar workers out of jobs, and God knows how many white-collar workers and managers and whatever. A lot of them went to other mills. Anyway, my boss warned me. He said, this is coming. This is going to happen. This mill is going to go defunct. So I went to Richmond, Virginia, and got a job there with West Engineering. They liked me a lot. They thought I was a good machinist for the kind of work they were doing. I worked there for a time and decided I wanted to go into business myself. So I worked part-time there, and I bought a little lathe, put it in a little utility shed I had in the back. In order to have room for me to get in the building, I had to cut a hole in the wall and put the back drive and motor all on the outside and build a box around it, keep it from getting rained on. So I had a workbench in there with a lathe on it. And I had a little drill press and had a little cutoff saw. So I made spray nozzles for mosquito sprayers around swimming pools. That was a big deal for a few years. And I made thousands of them things, little tiny instrument-sized stuff, and I made thousands of them. Well, I needed a couple more machines, and I needed a bigger place, so I rented a little storefront in Richmond and bought some machines. And I was making parts. My brother's boys were straight out of high school, so I put them to work in the shop doing things. Finally, one day, my brother walked in. He said, "Well," he said, "you need a partner." I said, "You're darn right I do. This is getting to be a bit much by myself." And he said, "Well," he said, "how about if I come in and starve to death with you?" He said, "Okay." So that's just about what we did. We did a lot of work for flight research and Sperry Marine in Charlottesville, AMF, American Machine and Foundry. We made industrial sewing machines, and we built tobacco manufacturing equipment. And but I was a lousy estimator. I never could figure out how much to charge people for things, and I always thought I was better than I was, so I made everything too cheap. And we lost money over a period of time. We stayed in business about 8 years and went bankrupt. Well, I took a little job there for a short time, but they were talking about moving my kids down into Chaco Valley to go to school with black children. Well, I don't have any problem with them going to school with black children, but I had a huge problem with them having to go down into Chaco Valley where people were shooting each other and killing and cutting and carrying on. So I moved to Deltaville, took the kids, and by the way, they went to school with black children there too. And I found a machine shop in Gloucester, Mars Machine Works. They were making wind tunnel parts. Pappy Grow, the boy's father who was running the shop, he was a wind tunnel maintenance head. So we got all the work we could do for the wind tunnels in NASA, and I had gone to work there. They were very impressed. They thought I was a genius because I knew how to do everything. And it wasn't that. It was just that I had a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. And I had a good education for being a machinist. Well, I finally, after some years, became shop foreman. And we were making turbine blades for the Missouri, the battleship Missouri, when she was put in mothballs. Reagan took her out of mothballs and several other battleships. And they were to fly the 7 seas again and extend America's power around the world. But they didn't have any spare parts. They didn't have enough turbine blades. The turbines wouldn't run, all of that. So we made parts for those battleships. And over time, we were making parts in manual, horizontal, and vertical milling machines and lathes and equipment, just like parts had always been made. And we made a slew of small turbine blades. And I get into a young lady that was working there to polish. And I told her what we needed to do, but I forgot to tell her one thing. I didn't tell her that the little piece of metal on the side of those things was called a steam deflector. It was really thin, and you had to be careful not to bend it or damage it. Well, she didn't understand, and she polished the steam deflectors off of $18,000 worth of turbine blades, which was, in those days, it was like $100,000 or $200,000 today. Well, everybody said, you need to fire that girl. And I said, no, I'm not going to fire her. She will never make that mistake again. I don't ever have to worry about her making that mistake again. So she stayed on. She's a good worker and a smart girl. Anyway, so finally we, for one reason or another, we decided to sell the machine shop. NASA was changing. They were going away from space travel. They were getting into other things that we didn't care nothing about. And I really didn't want to do a bunch of stuff I didn't want to do. So anyway, decided to hell with it. We'd go sailing. Well, I needed a sailboat. I had sold the one I had because I was too busy as machine shop foreman. So I told my partners, I said, I'd like to build a boat. I said, maybe we could build 1 or 2 a year and sell them. So they agreed. They thought that would be a fun project. And of course, we were all, Bob Grow was the son of a barnstormer. And Bob was a flyer. And his younger brother, David, was a flyer. And we would buy these old, worn-out airplanes, and we'd rebuild them. And I was a good machinist and a good mechanic, and I could rebuild the engine on a biplane, one of them old big radial 8 or 9 cylinder, I forgot what they were, engines. And we didn't make a lot of money, but we made a lot of toys, and we played with them, and we played with them hard. So anyway, I wanted to build a sailboat, and they agreed. And so I went to Phil Bolger up in Massachusetts and told him what I wanted. And I wanted it to look a little like the Crocker ketch I'd had for many years. But aluminum was really cheap at that time because the Russians were selling it off, so I decided we'd build it out of aluminum since that was a material we best knew how to work with, aluminum and steel. So we built a boat, and it was mine. And in the meantime, they decided, the guys were ashamed of the fact that I was riding an old Honda motorcycle, and they were riding Harleys, so they bought me a brand new Harley. They decided I needed one, that it was downright shameful for their shop foreman and business partner to be riding a Honda. So anyway, that's how I got into riding Harley motorcycles. I enjoyed it, really. I'd jump on that thing, go down to Key West and hang out around the boats and stuff down there. A couple days later, I'd be back. So anyway, we built that boat, and we tried to sell them. Couldn't sell the darn thing. Couldn't stand up in it, and nobody in those days would buy a sailboat you couldn't stand up in. I didn't care. I was used to boats that you couldn't stand up in because many old boats only had about 5-foot headroom in them, so you had to walk inside kind of bent over. But anyway, I enjoyed the boat. It was wonderful. I thought it was a great boat. And so anyway, we sold the shop off. And we got some income out of it. We sold the building separate, sold the machinery. Broke my heart. All the machinery went to China. The machinery dealers bought it all up and shipped it all to China. And man, that hurt. But anyway, that was the way things were going in those days. And my old steel mill buddies had all lost their jobs. I heard a couple of them. Machinists who couldn't find jobs in Baltimore because the government there had run damn near all the big businesses out of town, and the city was steady going down. So anyway, I'd hired a couple of them, and they worked for me there. Doing this, I think I'll call it a day here. It's really this is really longer than I wanted to talk. I kind of got into it, which I have a tendency to do sometimes, but. I hope y'all have a good day, and I hope you enjoyed this little yarn. It's true. I might have improved on it just a tad. You know, that happens sometimes, but I try to be truthful with this stuff. So okay, y'all have a good day, and I'll see you again in probably a couple days.